Hello, good day. Welcome, everybody. We're very happy that you joined us. We have a great panel conversation today. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'm happy to be the host and moderator of this DevOps Institute SKILup webinar. Appreciate that you're joining us too. Our topic today is application security, strengthen, secure, and protect. If you're at all involved in security, or involved in software, you know AppSec is certainly hot, become a great topic. Getting a lot of importance and focus, that can be good and challenging also. So we have a panel of experts, folks that are very well experienced in AppSec and can talk to us a little bit about some of the topics we're going to discuss today. So I want to thank the team at Devops Institute, all of the members, ambassadors, everyone that helps put on these events, as well as the folks from TechStrong Group, who also are helping put on this event. As I said, my name is Mitch Ashley. I'm CTO with TechStrong Group, and I'm also a principal at a research firm, TechStrong Research, that focuses on app security and cybersecurity in general, as well as some other topic areas. So we want to say just a little bit about our platform that we're doing today's webinar on. This particular platform called Big Marker, it's actually really great for having conversation. The feedback that I get whenever doing panels or engagements like this is everyone really loves it when you feel like you're part of the conversation rather than being talked to. So we're not going to do any slides. We have an outline of some things we're going to talk about and discuss, but we want you to discuss that with us. So please jump in on the chat. You're welcome to post comments and thoughts and things there. You can post questions there. You can also post your question in the Q&A section, and we'll weave those into the conversation. If it's topical right then, one of us will bring it up. If it's something we might get to or kind of help direct and guide our conversation, you never know where this is going to go, because a lot of it is directed by kind of where you are and what you contribute to as part of the conversation. So let's jump right to our panel today. I'm just going to go do a little round robin and ask each person to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about the company that they're with. Let's start out with Manish Gupta, CEO with Shift Left. Manish?
Yeah, hi. Greetings. Thank you, Mitch. My name is Manish Gupta. I'm the founder and CEO of Shift Left.
Great. And can you just say a little bit about what Shift Left does?
Sure. We are, of course, an application security company. And as the name suggests, we believe we need to insert application security in the developer workflow so that we can fix more vulnerabilities and reduce application risk, which, after all, should be the goal of application security.
Great. Thank you, Manish. Julius Missot, who is CTO and co-founder with MergeBase.
Hello. Yes. Exactly. That's Mitch. You stole my thunder, Mitch.
Give away all your secrets all in one.
So MergeBase is a SEA company, software composition analysis. So that means it's a tool that you can use to figure out, the pieces that your application was put together from, right? All the, the DLLs and jar files and libraries, all those good things, will help you figure out all those pieces and then what the versions are, and if there's vulnerabilities, if there's license issues, that kind of stuff. And our claim to fame at MergeBase is that you can, point at those during the build time, source time, or also at runtime and production. You can even, instrument the libraries to find out if they're actually being executed, which, I guess it's that way. Similar to some of the capabilities of Contrast, actually. It's kind of interesting take on that in some regards.
Excellent. Thank you, Julius. Curtis Parker, how about you?
Hi, thanks, Mitch. Nice to be with everyone today. As you say, Curtis Parker, based in the Bay Area. I work for Rezilion. Rezilion is a DevSecOps automation platform focused on automating all of the aspects around securing the software development lifecycle, from application security to platform security to runtime security, but all the way across the DevSecOps pipeline, and done so in an extensible way that works with the tool sets that organizations have, the various and varied tool sets within a single organization, let alone the multiple organizations that are out there. And one of the focuses that we have is making sure that we can give developers and security teams their time back and provide a platform that reduces friction between those organizations by up-leveling the amount of fidelity in information that they get to make decisions around what to prioritize, what's important, and what to fix. So, that's pretty much the focus for us. And as we move forward through the conversation, I can't wait to tell you more.
Great. Very good. Stephen Walters from Everbridge. Stephen?
Hi. Thanks, Mitch. Good to be here. I'm a solution architect with Everbridge, and I specialize on the critical event management for digital side of things, most specifically the Xmatters platform. We're about providing service reliability and service availability, ensuring that platforms are maintained and continue to run, not least within the security aspects. So anything that's happening within both production and non-production environments will be there to help integrate tools, platforms, people, ensuring that information is passed through. It's about getting the right information to the right people at the right time. I'm also a DevOps Institute ambassador. Very pleased to be working with several people in the DevSecOps area around that. Been doing quite a bit of work in that area recently. Myself been in DevOps transformation for 15 years, and I don't know if you can tell, but 30 years in IT does take its toll a little bit.
I can attest to that for sure. Last but not least, Jeff Williams, and of course, many of us know you, Jeff, from your work for OS. So thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about you and Contrast Security.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. It's great to be here. Contrast pioneer. Well, so I'm the CTO and founder at Contrast, and Contrast pioneered the use of instrumentation for security purposes. So that covers products like categories like IAST and RASP, and we do SCA using instrumentation as well. Really, our goal is to help companies transform themselves from kind of where they're mowing the grass, finding vulnerabilities and fixing them, to companies that are reliably capable of producing secure code the first time. And so we look to reduce things like mean time to remediate vulnerabilities, vulnerability escape rate, those kind of metrics that really show you're making progress. Contrast platform includes all the kinds of tools we've mentioned here before, vulnerability detection tools for custom code, library analysis tools to find libraries in open source, runtime protection tools that work in production to prevent vulnerabilities from being exploited, even serverless and scanning tools. So we've got a kind of complete platform for an AppSec program.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you, all of you. And just for our audience benefit, that's probably the most you're going to hear about specific products. We're not here to pitch products. This is a conversation amongst security professionals. It's one of the things that I really enjoy about the security industry, having been in it for 20 plus years, is there is a lot of contributing to each other, both open source and conversation, helping moving the state of the art along, as well as competing. So I think we'll have a great conversation. Let's start out with application security. Those two words means a whole heck of a lot. And you could just hear that in our introductions and all the areas that we're talking about. We don't have to create a formal definition, but what's kind of a good working definition when we say application security? What all does that encompass? What should we be thinking about as practitioners in our respective areas? Maybe Manish, if you want to start out first.
Sure, thank you. I like to put myself in the shoes of a customer. If they've created an application, and of course, the modern definition of an application has evolved, gone from monoliths to microservices to, as Jeff was saying, Lambda functions. But if we were to put ourselves in the shoes of a developer or a security, I believe their outcome that they desire is that once they've created this application and hosting it, let's say in the public cloud, how can we make sure that it is not attackable successfully? How can we make sure that the bad guys can't get to it? That, to me, is the application security, which, of course, requires that we improve at fixing bugs, fixing vulnerabilities during development. But very rarely do you meet organizations that are able to completely eliminate the attack surface, and therefore there is also a need to protect the application in production.
See, a question for that though. I totally agree with what you're saying, but and I kind of have my way of thinking of that, which is just 443, port 443. That's application security.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, expand the scope a little there. Do people think AppSec also? How does that pertain to devices, right? Tablets and phones and Android and Apple phones. Just a question for the panel here.
It's interesting. We've been having some discussions recently with a lot of other groups and organizations out there that application security isn't just around information, IT. There's also an aspect around OT, around operational technology. So there are a lot of older devices out there that are sitting which are networked, and they are also exposable to potential attack. So it's what we define as application security, I think, is becoming broader, and all of the time there are always new things and new elements which we're bringing in. So application security, as you say, at one time was a monolithic application. Infrastructure as code came along. Do we then treat the infrastructure as code as an application? Yes, we do. Things that are sitting within the cloud, containerization. All of these aspects, all of these are things that require security layers, and they're things that we are required to control. So that for me is application security is much broader than just a definition of applications, really, because that's quite fluid.
So it's funny. I've never thought of the application in application security as like a web app or a mobile phone app. What it means is software that's applied to a problem. And it's every kind of software, whether it's in airplanes or blenders or industrial factories or anything. Anytime you apply software to a problem, now it has a threat context. And now you can start thinking about what defenses it needs and why those defenses are correct and effective for defending against those threats. And so the application isn't like, xyz.com. It's all kinds of software anywhere it's been applied to a problem. And you can't do security unless the software is applied to a problem, because it's totally different. I use a chainsaw example a lot. You can secure a chainsaw for cutting down trees, but it's not secure for cutting hair. And the context is everything here. So to me, that's how I think about the scope of AppSec, all code everywhere, making sure threats are properly addressed.
I'm still going to stand up for my port 443 thing because, I hope my Blender's not taking out a domain name, but it is listening on port 443.
Well, I think.
I don't understand. Like, are you trying to say that having SSL is the only thing you need to do for AppSec?
Oh, no, more like the opposite, the inverse of that is in port 443 is just always open on everything. It's open on the Blender, it's open on the corporate website, on the internet, and it's always allowed, the traffic's always allowed through there. So that's where you start thinking about AppSec, because this is the traffic we're letting through.
So what's behind it, essentially, which can be anything, to your point, Jeff, right? Any kind of software.
But it's not even limited to
right?
To HTTP. I mean, that's just a tiny subset of all the software in the world.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that is where, both Jeff and Stephen have done a good job of expanding the definition. And yeah, I stand corrected. It is not about a web app. It is about any software, regardless of where it's running. Is that the point?
One interesting thing that
I would just say really quickly to chip into the conversation here is that I think traditionally it has been defined as what we would think of as a monolithic application, as Stephen said, and it has expanded for sure. And one of the interesting questions is, how has that impacted organizational processes and technology stacks, and who's responsible for an application? I think there's been blurred lines there, and that's one of the interesting things I think for us all as practitioners but vendors in the space, is how have we been able to reorient how we help these personas within these organizations solve the problem as these blurred lines have occurred, because the application sits on an ephemeral platform that changes, very dynamic, has a lot of elasticity, and is in many regards at the end of the day, from a risk point of view, which is what organizations are really concerned with, from a risk point of view, they're almost inseparable. And one of the questions I ask customers when I'm speaking with them a lot is, who is responsible for the application and how they define the application. Some of the times they've got traditional AppSec teams that really are focused on more traditional application security, kind of SAST and dynamic application security testing. And others, it does encompass the platform. It encompasses a lot of third-party components that are increasingly a part of the application stack as well, hence the rise of software composition analysis tools and capabilities there. So I think it has evolved, and it's a really exciting space. But from even within organizations, the standardization of how you address the stack is not necessarily fully consistent, which is why I think the challenge for vendors in this space is to provide not a one-size-fits-all solution, but something organizations can kind of mold around their own processes and technology stack.
I think that's a really good point, because it ties into what we've been saying, which is, what's an app, right? We're really talking about software, and the challenge with that is everything is software. The whole stack, the infrastructure, all of it is software now, and we aren't wrapping it in a protective coating anymore, and that becomes our security layer. It's about how we create secure software for any of those elements. But who's responsible for that? We talk about shift left. It's the name of your company, Manish. But shift left, and is it now all the developers' responsibility to make sure they're creating secure code? Is it something? How does a security team, security organization, how do they play into this? Who owns app security, or how do you divvy out the various responsibilities? Who wants to take a shot at that?
Well, so the obvious answer is that everyone's responsible for security, but whenever you say that, when everyone's responsible, no one's responsible for security. And there are certain aspects of security that do increasingly need to be the responsibility of developers in order to code right. But at the same time, look, application security, product security in general creates more work for developers. We identify things that they should be fixing. And therefore, for the foreseeable future, I don't see, unless we change how developers are compensated, which is not for fixing security bugs, at least for the large part today, that they will not be responsible for application security. And therefore, there needs to be another persona. Now, historically, it's been application security. We are seeing the emergence of DevSecOps, which is sort of harkening back to taking a page out of DevOps. At least that's what we see. I'd love to get other people's inputs too, of course.
So personally, I don't really think that our job in AppSec is to find bugs and point them out to developers. Like that's kind of the mowing the grass approach, right? Like you're just going to keep doing that forever.
That point.
Okay, I thought that's what you said.
Right, I guess let that be the only question where there is agreement.
So, look, I think our job is a little bigger. I think you do need to use the big machinery of software development.
About perhaps the other aspects.
Manish, let Jeff finish. Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, all right. I'm sorry, I'm not able to hear Jeff at all. My bad.
Yeah, I think you do need to use the big machinery of software development in order to manage the scale of application security. And there's no way for a small AppSec team in a company that has hundreds or thousands of applications all being built to deal with that. So, I think it's if there are AppSec specialists, their job is to be a force multiplier to try and empower the development teams with the tools and processes that they need in order to be able to scale AppSec. But they can't just do it all themselves. And it's not just about finding vulnerabilities. It's much more efficient to get in front of things and make sure that they've got a threat model, that they're putting in the right defenses and automated testing for those defenses. That way, they're much more likely to come out close to the goal.
There's an important element, though, that I think needs to be stressed here that comes from that DevSecOps world. I mean, it's a fundamental DevOps principle, which is that we've got to avoid silos. It's how often have we seen it with those old monolithic structures that security has been a silo that's stuck out on the end, and we don't get around to the security testing or checking anything on the security until just before we go live. And then that's when we find the security issue and we have to go back to the beginning again. We can't go back to those kinds of days. So I agree, there's always a place for those AppSec professionals, those people who understand, because they're the ones who are going to understand these are the rules that you need to abide by. These are the conditions that need to be set. This is what we need to be testing for. But they need to be part of the overall software delivery lifecycle, and they need to be an integrated part of it that ensures they're not part of a silo. They need to be integrated into the teams. So you're talking about inclusivity. You're talking about embedding security at all layers and at all levels within the software delivery lifecycle, and not just treating it as something separate that somebody else is responsible for.
Yeah, it's Stephen.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, go ahead, Manish. I was just going to chip in there, but go ahead. I'll jump in after you.
I was going to ask the question, and maybe I'm taking this conversation on a different tangent, but so I'll let you add, Curtis. But the question I was going to ask is, I agree with Stephen that AppSec, application security team, needs to be part of the software development exercise. But what happens first? I mean, do we create the organizational structure first, or is it the technology or the tools that have to enable that to happen?
That's where Conway's law comes in. At the end of the day, it's about having an organizational structure which reflects in a way the way you want the system to be built, the way you want the system to be operated. So even thinking of it from those basics, if you want security to be embedded in every layer of your system, you need security embedded in every layer of your organization.
Yeah, and I think there's an increasing need for that. I mean, if we, like I said, this is a really exciting space, and there's folks on the call that have been leaders in this space for a long time and have seen that change. Looking at you, Jeff. But if we think back to monolithic applications and the development lifecycle, it wasn't agile. It was waterfall methodology. Updates didn't happen on a daily basis. They happened quarterly. With the dynamism at which one, software is created, but two, how much of it is created, the volume of software that's created is significant. When I first started out, most development focus was focused toward the internal applications that company use. Now, as a result of digitization, the applications that are being developed are the revenue generating channels for those businesses by and large. So they're very significant shifts. And I think Mark Anderson said software code is eating the world. And that's what we've seen. It's taking over lots of different processes, whether they be internal, external processes, which drives a need for you to build in security practices into the development pipeline. It's kind of like the question, who needs to do work? Everyone needs to do work. Everyone, to some degree, needs to be responsible for security. But like Manish said, if everyone's responsible, no one's responsible, which is why there needs to be practices, there needs to be gates, there needs to be automation. And one of the great things that we've seen with developers is they have been great with automation at developing automated tools to overcome their challenges. Why? Because they're coders and they use code to solve some of their own problems. And it's been a great opportunity being in the security space to work with developers and drive automation into their development processes, which means they don't necessarily have to think about security. They need to put in a practice, they need to put in protocols, they need to put in gates, they need to have a policy, but automation will help to drive outcomes. So defining the outcome early on is really important.
Let's just get real here a little bit. Like, I think there's no question that software has changed dramatically over the last
for the sake of it, can run amok. Like one of the complaints that I have about the SCA industry is the recent phenomena of companies finding vulnerable libraries and automatically upgrading them. Now, of course, that only happens successfully for 10, 15% of the libraries. After that, those library upgrades will break your application. But this runs counter to the very software engineering practice of control change. And we saw this issue, 2 weeks ago, where this UA parser JS issue came out where someone planted malicious code into the library. And if we continue to run these practices where we are just constantly upgrading our libraries, regardless of whether we should be worrying about whether that library vulnerability actually makes my application vulnerable, we are taking additional risk, and we are opening the door of yet another attack vector for the attackers to leverage this best practice to inject more and more malicious code into the libraries. So yes,
funny.
it's important.
I've got to jump in, right? Well, if I did a webinar here with TechStrong like a few weeks ago, and at the end I was like, anyone on the audience, if you want, I'll bet anyone $100 American that within 10 years libraries upgrading themselves at runtime will be like not every library, but a significant practice in the industry. The libraries will just upgrade themselves, right? Just like without any intervention. Jeff Williams, that was really interesting when you said, let's get real. I was curious where you were going.
Oh, yeah, thanks. So first of all, on the library issue, the risk of having outdated libraries with known vulnerabilities massively outweighs the risk of someone introducing malicious code into a library and that finding its way into your application. But that said, the point I was getting at before was software has changed dramatically over the last 10 to 15 years, no question. And Curtis, you laid out a great, some of the background of that, all super important. But security, application security specifically, has changed incredibly little. So, the OWASP Top 10 2021 just came out. I wrote the first one in 2002, 2003. It's the same stuff in there. And even worse, it's the same exact vulnerabilities. That's kind of crazy. The average number of vulnerabilities per application.
Scripting, it's all the stuff we've had for years, right, Jeff? What do you think we haven't improved? Why haven't we gotten better about those fundamentals?
I think the market is broken. I think software security is not visible. So consumers can't make an informed choice about whether they want the secure one or the insecure one. And so there's no motivation for software producers to create secure software. This is the whole market for lemons argument that you may have heard in software security. But until we fix the market, we're never going to be able to build secure code. And that's why I'm so excited about, some of the things that are coming out of the executive order, pushing more transparency and visibility through things like SBOM and software security labels and minimum standards for testing. Like those kinds of things change the market. And then we can do all these things that we think we're doing in DevSecOps, but nobody's really doing them because, frankly, most AppSec programs are still very waterfall. They think about security requirements. They think about doing security architecture, all as like one big monolithic thing. They think about doing security testing as one big thing. It's not Devops principles, like breaking the work into small pieces, tracking them from development through into production with testing, and gradually increasing the security of a whole system. That's not how we do security.
And I'd like to come in there because I want to bring together exactly what you've just said, Jeff, with what Curtis was talking about. And it's a real challenge that's actually faced the general DevOps world, not just within DevSecOps, but it's really amplified, I think, within DevSecOps. We're technologists. We love our tools. At the end of the day, we think we can put in automation and that makes everything better. It's the universal panacea. But that isn't the truth. That isn't the real situation. As Jez Humble and his peers put together in the CALMS framework, you can't just implement automation on its own. You need the cultural change. You need to have lean processes. You need to be measuring what you're doing. You need to be sharing on that work. And for me, the biggest challenge in all of that is that C. It's the culture, and it's exactly what you stressed there, that the AppSec world is still living in that old siloed cultural way. It's a bit of an oxymoron for the security world, because security it's about secrets, it's about secrecy, and it's about keeping things to ourselves. But DevOps and DevSecOps is actually about opening up, and it's about being with those people and talking about these things and getting other people together. And culturally, that's alien for a lot of people from that traditional kind of AppSec kind of world. I mean, I'd love to hear your opinion on that. Do you think that's something that the industry itself has to embrace, is be more open to cultural change?
Oh, yeah. I'll put it this way. The biggest risk to application security is the traditional waterfall mindset. Only when we start really doing, it's not, people say DevSecOps and they think it means like staple the old security practices to DevOps. And that's not it. Really, we have to change the way that we do the work of security. What are we producing? How do we produce it? How do we get that work flowing into production reliably? When the work changes, that's DevSecOps.
I'm curious, Jeff. We use oftentimes a moniker for that is design security in. That can mean into the process or into the software, but okay, but what does that mean? What do we do? How do we think about this differently? Maybe you kick off that conversation with us.
I just did a keynote at LastCon, which I posted to my LinkedIn if you're interested, that focuses on this problem exactly. Yeah. But I think in DevOps, there's a kind of a critical name for doing all this, like trying to do all the security up front, like design it in. They would call it big design up front. And it's not a compliment. It's like doing it wrong, because I think that you need to think about security differently. You have to look at your situation and say, what's my biggest risk? And then design a solution for that. Just that little piece. Maybe it's clickjacking. And maybe you say, if you're clickjacking, we're gonna use X-frame options headers. And then you say, here's how I'm going to test that so that every outgoing response has the X-frame options header set properly. And then I'm going to deliver that into production, and I'm going to measure it in production so that I know it's working. And then you go back and you do that for the next thing, the next biggest risk. And I don't care what your threat model is, but right now we do this weird thing. We grab some security requirements from somewhere else, like PCI or OWASP or somewhere, and we say, that's what we're going to focus on, regardless of your threat model. Then we build an architecture that is not related to the requirements. It's just like whatever's built into the framework that we're using. And then we test for stuff that's not the requirements or the design. It's just whatever the pen tester happens to have in their head that day. And we end up with almost no security. I've seen people test for SQL injection on applications that don't have a SQL database. What are we doing? We're wasting so much time, and we're getting such poor results. It's crazy to me how tightly people grip on to those old concepts like security requirements and these old PDF documents that have their security design in them. And we gotta stop it.
One of the best AppSec experiences I had as a practitioner, as a software engineer, this is like 10 years ago, but I kind of suspect it would still hold today, is where the company now, it didn't necessarily identify what is the biggest risk, but they had a system that they considered very important, over 1 million users. And they brought in an outside firm to just audit the code. But the other thing that firm did when they audited the code is they did some training with the developers too. So they said, well, we've looked at your code, and now we want to sit with you guys as a group, and we just want to give you guys some, show you the way we think about this. And it was like, even during that meeting, just with sort of Q&A and brainstorming, we identified like serious flaws. Like you could get log files, you could get production log files just by manipulating the URL. And it was interesting because the outside firm that was doing this audit and this training, they hadn't come up with that on their own. We never would have come up with it on our own, but together, just bringing in that different way of thinking and having the developers actually exposed to it caused us all to start thinking in this different way. And that was an amazing experience. Just so really, I really would encourage companies on this call, like bringing out some outside thinking on the AppSec front.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. And we've seen this technologically. There's been massive, what the DevOps tool sets have changed over time. Some of the change of landscape in application floors has changed. Information leakage and cryptographic issues, credential management, cross-site scripting, things that have been long-standing flaw contributors as it relates to kind of vulnerability security issues. On the other hand, things like buffer overflow have reduced as code bases have migrated from languages like C++ to JavaScript, where buffer management is handled by the language itself. So I don't think you can stick to a paradigm of testing that doesn't reflect some of the changes in your code base as it's migrated and evolved over time, because you'll end up wasting a lot of time. So bringing in outside help to understand and to be very real on the maturity of your organization and where the risk lies and how you need to maybe change processes to address the risk, I think is really important. And I would say, automation, again, I'm not saying it's a panacea, but where there are DevSecOps oriented teams, I've seen research after research that states DevSecOps drives behavior and a cultural shift. Those teams and those people that are in those teams act as advocates. And the outcome of that is they're likely to conduct more frequent security scans of the code base at regular intervals during the DevSecOps lifecycle. And then that will drive faster fix times as they see more issues. And there's also a lot of data that suggests when issues are seen in the first 1 month, there's a lot of energy behind fixing them. And then after they kind of move into the backlog and they get added to technical debt. So the more there are advocates that are driving automation and driving process around risk visibility and fixing the risk and helping the constituent teams, the developers do that, you're going to have better security outcomes. But you do need outside parties, I think, sometimes to come in and be real with you on where the risks are and how you've evolved and your maturity has evolved over time.
So let me throw a wrinkle into this conversation. And what I'm bringing this from is I host some groups that are CIOs who are talking about the environment that we're in. And some of the thinking is starting to shift from, investing in prevention, whether that's designing it in or, better technology to stop the attacks, to, at some point, every piece of code is vulnerable. Every business will be attacked, and every business will be successfully attacked in some form or another. Not just today, but in the future. It's just a fact that matters, not if or when, as already has, and it will again. So the thinking is shifting to response is equally, if maybe not even slightly more important than prevention, meaning don't throw prevention out. We're not talking about stop doing all the important good things you're doing, but your ability to respond when you find something or when you're attacked or you see a threat very quickly, so I bring that up because do we need to start rethinking about security as just what the threat model is that you mentioned, Jeff, or that it's DevSecOps and it's built into how we create software, but our ability to respond to anywhere in the software stack, including software that we're writing, is equally important. You can agree, disagree, call BS, say think that's a most brilliant thing you've heard today, or whatever you want to do.
So Mitch, I mean, I'm going to straight away say no. That's not a wrinkle. That's actually absolutely essential. I spoke recently at a DevOps Institute SKILup day on DevSecOps, and I mentioned that exact phrase. I said, "No fortress is impregnable." The person that's out there wanting to get hold of your valuable information, the data in your system, is not sitting on his laurels using whatever he's got to hand. He's coming up with new methods. He's getting innovative. He's coming up with new ways of doing things. And you can't necessarily develop in advance for thinking what that other person is thinking about. You have to be able to be reactive as well as proactive. And that's why what I state is that there are two key principles. There is the principle of being proactive, which is shift left, which is about prevention. But there's also about being reactive, which is shift right. And it's those shift right principles of including how development teams, how testers, how business analysts, how AppSec people can work in the operations side of things around exactly that, how we react to those situations. Because at the end of the day, when you're dealing in a reactive situation, every second counts, because it can mean the difference between you retaining your data or losing your data. And for your business, that can mean the difference between a nothing fine or a huge GDPR fine. So I think it is extremely important that we don't just consider the shift left, we consider the shift right. We have to be reactive as well as proactive, and we have to look to implement those in a balance.
Talking
So
about
go ahead.
all right, just a quick comment then. When I'm thinking about response, though, in the application security context, maybe this is just me, but I always get depressed because then I start thinking about logs and applications, especially in-house applications, right? Like, you know, if you're at a bank, your online banking, or that you've wrote for your bank, whatever, the application logs just are often awful. Right, like they're saying a bunch of nonsense you don't care about, and then they don't actually tell you that a user logged in and did a transaction. Like it's like nowhere in the logs. So like,
I totally agree with that.
Good, Jeff. Yeah, jump in, Jeff.
Give me a call.
So, two things here. First of all, half of Contrast business is monitoring apps in runtime and making sure that they don't get attacked and preventing vulnerabilities from being exploited and so on. So we have a huge amount of visibility. The average app is attacked 13,000 times every month. And there are no apps that don't get attacked at all. So it's really quite prevalent out there. Really, I think what you're saying is it's not just DevSec, it's also SecOps. It's right in the name, DevSecOps. And like that whole SecOps piece is really tough for companies because traditionally we've only had a WAF. Like that's it. That's the only thing that worked there. And WAFs are not very good because they're looking at the wrong level. They're looking at network traffic,
well, they're
trying to
good
identify
for
application layer attacks.
they're good for telling your auditors or compliance people that you did something. WAFs
They're
are
only good for
that.
saying that you have a WAF.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is why I think it's crazy that people deploy web applications without runtime protection. RAS builds right into applications. It's part of them, so it has the full context of all the transactions that are going on. You get visibility into exactly what security events you're interested in. You can even add security events, to your logging point. It's if you want to enhance your visibility, you can put sensors on methods that you care about and say, hey, here, this user just did this authentication or this access check or whatever. But it's really getting to what I call security observability. And it's not logs, it's continuous monitoring.
Mm-hmm.
I find though, when you go even deep into the runtime like that, often the user has been decoupled from the transaction that's happening because it's being thrown into a queue and it's being like, you don't have the IP address anymore. You don't have the MAC address because it's all being decoupled. And so it still makes traceability and response hard.
I don't agree.
Not entirely true.
I agree with Jeff here in that there are those tools, those monitoring tools and those capabilities to get you that information. But what is just as key is about making sure that information is enriched and you're not getting information from just one data source. There are multiple locations and various tools and assets you've got to hand that will help you to understand exactly what is going on with an attack and help you to actually handle that and manage it and deal with it in an appropriate kind of timescale. So
yeah, but it's best to prevent those vulnerabilities from being exploited. And Curtis, you mentioned buffer overflows. That's a good example of where advances in things like compiler technology and ASLR and DEP made a whole class of vulnerabilities very difficult to exploit. RASP does the same thing at the application layer for things like SQL injection and XXE and expression language injection and so on. That's the way that we make real progress, like in the public health sense, we make real progress against some of these epidemics.
Yeah, I would just say, just coming back to your point, Mitch, is that it's ironic actually, as we talk about, protection of applications in production, not just focusing on what's happening in the development lifecycle. Completely agree. It has to be across the supply chain. But one of the challenges is performing patches for issues that exist. Because you're not going to, it's all about, security is all about risk, and you're not going to be able to distill. Most applications have flaws, right? That's the reality we're living in. And that, harks back to, I think what Jeff is saying is that we haven't necessarily, security hasn't been able to move the needle despite, record levels of investment in it. And there are inherent challenges in patching, applications. There's a lot of anxiety for teams, operations teams around patching production applications. It can take days, weeks, or even months to detect and patch an issue in production. But one of the things that we've been focused on is, are the issues that you're looking at, are they actually exploitable? So assessing true exploitability is really important, because that's going to help you prevent unplanned work with the risk associated with it. It's going to reduce the resource burden in an already resource constrained domain. And last but not least, there's already limited collaboration between application development and security teams. So up-leveling the veracity of the information shared between these teams reduces the load and helps to reduce the friction. And the last point I'd make is, in terms of tracking, where risk is from development lifecycle to production. And this comes back to, the declaration around this software bill of materials. I think you heard it mentioned earlier in the conversation. That is going to help, because changing culture, there's a soft approach and a hard approach. And a hard approach sometimes is these directives that helps to create a landscape where organizations are, they need to commit to having a clear understanding of their software bill of materials. So, for example, if you have a clear understanding of your software bill of materials pre-production and you push that into production, you can monitor to see if that software bill of materials has changed, right? And you can, and if it has changed, how did it change? What's the risk associated with that change? What was the risk associated when you pushed it? This is really going to up-level the information that teams and customers of software producers have when it comes to understanding the risk of software, both in their own software and supply chain risk, which we've seen has been a huge issue. And I think what was driving the directive in the first place.
I didn't totally get that. Like, if the software changes in production, something else is really wrong. That should never happen.
But it does. We still have.
Well, sure, but I mean, the problem is not that the library got updated. The problem is that you got hacked. It's already over if the software changes in production.
Not necessarily.
Well, your process should protect against that.
I think could get hacked.
The big problem that you raised,
always protect against it.
I think the more interesting problem that you raised is the exploitability of vulnerabilities. And when you find a vulnerability in custom code, it's generally exploitable, because the way that you found it, probably involved looking at the code or watching it at runtime or doing a pen test or something. So it's exploitable. But the library problems, most people identify them just because the library happens to be there, maybe in the source code repo. Well, there's a long distance between that and being exploitable. So a couple of facts. First of all, what's in your source code repo doesn't represent what's in production. There are libraries that are in the source code repo that are used for test environments and things that don't make it into production. And there's a lot of libraries that are in production that aren't in the source code repo. Things that come from your app server and your runtime are really important for security, but not analyzed. So I think it's better to analyze them at runtime. And as Julius mentioned earlier, one great technique to find out whether that code actually runs is to use instrumentation at runtime to see what pieces of those libraries are invoked. And we just published a big study about this. It's fascinating. Only 6% of open source code in an application ever runs. Many libraries, over half, are never invoked at all. And so the fastest, most powerful thing you can do to rule out all those false positives is to understand which libraries actually run in the production environment, and then make sure you upgrade those libraries.
That's kind of
interesting. I agree with that point for sure. And
minification.
The one thing I'd add to that it just really quickly is, you're absolutely right. Continuous monitoring is going to happen it could happen in stage, for example, as well as production, right? It doesn't necessarily, it could be in a pre-prod environment, but you can do it earlier. You can shift that left as well. You can do dynamic scanning of images that you're going to use, for example, a golden image that's been layered with your software components at the application level as part of an SEA scan as well. And you can track the code provenance, what came through my software repository, what has gone through to be tested in stage, what has gone to a pre-production environment, and then what goes into production. And you can take a look at the software bill of materials at each stage to take a look to see in production where the code has come from. Did it come from any of the checks in my authoritative software?
I get it. I'm just saying which code actually runs is a huge part of this decision.
But what I'm saying is that a lot of process is put around a pipeline or a software development lifecycle. So understanding through looking at the software bill of materials and being able to audit what it looks like at each stage, you can assess the risk of, am I seeing software in production that even came from that software supply chain? Is there code provenance there? And if not, what is the risk that is at present? But you're right, we've done similar testing to see that most of the libraries associated with open source code, these are packages that never get run. And that's where you're taking a look at moving the needle in terms of understanding true exploitable risk.
It's not separate from the SBOM, by the way. The SBOM should reflect which libraries actually run in production, that are actually used part of the application.
So let me jump in. Guys. I'm gonna do a rough timeout. Okay, hold on. So timeout. No timeout. So we have about 8 minutes left, and I want to give some guidance to folks. I appreciate all the conversation. I feel like I'm leading a team of horses. It really wants to run, which is great. So I'd like us just to wrap with, if you were in the audience's shoes, someone who's a practitioner, where do you help either yourself or your colleagues start to think about application security differently? What kind of resources, training or certifications could be part of it? What other ways we can help each other transform our idea about AppSec and how we do take some of the approaches that we're taking? Stephen, I'm going to ask you to go first. I know it's a little unfair to be first when I just asked the question, so I'm trying to give you a little bit of time to think about it.
No, because I do have an immediate response to that, and it's something that I was thinking about earlier, and that is that there's a responsibility right at the top level within an organization. You only have to look at some of I've been looking at use cases, some of the cases, reasons why there have been breaches. And a large part of it is because the business themselves have not treated security as a value. They are seeing it as a cost. They're not seeing it as something which actually represents value to their organization. That's something that's changing over the last few years, especially with what's happened with COVID, with the pandemic, a lot more people being online, and there's been a lot more shift in terms of the kinds of attacks and cyber attacks that are going on. And that is that organizations at the top level, at the very top level, at that C-suite level, need to understand that security within your software, within your IT business, within your IT infrastructure has to be treated as a business value. You need to have it as part of your business success criteria. If you can turn around to your customers and prove that you have security built in, that you are always looking to implement security, and that you really do treat it as a value, that should cascade down throughout your organization and should be a real driver within your organization to take that responsibility in ensuring everything is secure. Now, that's not the be-all and end-all answer. I just think that's a really good starting point. Great. And I'll leave that now to hand over to somebody else.
Okay.
As to what the
we have 2 minutes. And jump in there, Julius. Why don't you go next?
For me, I imagine the audience here is probably a mix of very advanced, mature AppSec programs in place, in the middle of the road, and then just starting out. And but for all three of them, maybe this is just me, what's that phrase, chasing the dragon there, but that experience I had 10 years ago was incredible. So if you could ever bring in an auditor, an AppSec professional, have them spend time with your code, with your systems, and then have them give training to your development team, that was an incredible experience. And I think that lifted the whole org there for definitely like 6 to 12 months on the AppSec front.
Great. Awesome. Jeff, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, my advice, if you had to focus on one thing, is to shoot for what I call security and sunshine. Like, create visibility around, or better, observability around everything related to application security. And it's a little, it subsumes a little bit of Stephen's point, because when you make application security visible and part of sort of the definition of done, then I believe, and I've seen organizations do the right thing. But as long as security kind of stays hidden in PDF reports and hidden in various bug trackers and things like that, it doesn't get the proper visibility. And so then executives can't make the right decisions about where to invest and why. But I just think that's a real game changer. And hopefully that's what we're doing in the market writ large. By pushing concepts like security labels and SBOMs and so on, we're flipping on the lights so that everyone can see it. And my experience, and I've done many of the kinds of sessions that Julius was talking about with companies. I've trained thousands of developers, and to a person, everyone is interested in doing the right thing. Once you show them once you flip on the lights, then everyone does the right thing. So that's what I focus on.
Great. Curtis, why don't you bring it home for us?
Yeah, I think one of the really important things organizations are starting to do, and we've seen this with establishing kind of mean time to remediate and things like that, is setting up goals and outcomes that they want to achieve when it comes to security, and then having metrics in place to measure how they are achieving those goals over time, and then allow the teams to make investments, invest in it, and make it a priority of investment. I've been a product manager for a long time, and I used to have to add security as part of some of the build that I did, and it wasn't the most sexy thing to put at the top of the roadmap. However, if there are metrics and goals that incentivize me as a product person to build in security into the product that I'm shipping, it's going to be something that I'm more likely to do if there's more pressure and visibility as to the risk as part of my code base. Then that's going to be, there's going to be a focus on that when I ship it. That's going to incentivize me as well. So having goals, having the right metrics to measure how you're tracking against those goals, and clear visibility and investment to allow teams to make the necessary investments along a roadmap to achieve those outcomes, I think is vitally important.
Well, fantastic. What a great group. Really appreciate all of you. I want to thank each of you, Jeff Williams, co-founder and CTO with Contrast, Stephen Walters, solution architect with Everbridge, Curtis. Thank you for wrapping it up there with Curtis, VP of Product Strategy, Field CTO with Resilient, and Julius Musso, CTO and co-founder with MergeBase, and also to Manish Gupta, who dropped off for technical difficulties, Manish, who's CEO with Shift Left. Just one parting thought. I often hear sort of the developers being blamed for writing insecure code or unsecure. I'm not sure about insecure, and I always tell people there's no developer who wants to write unsecure code. Nobody wants to do that. They don't do that on purpose. So I think us working and helping each other improve the state of the art, improve security for all of us is a great benefit. And if I could put a plug into and a thanks to our the folks who put on today's webinar, the folks at Devops Institute, a lot of great training on DevSecOps and security, as well as DevOps and other areas. And I know your ambassador, Stephen, you believe in the program as well. A lot of good folks there, a lot of good resources, as well as many others. So thank you to each of you. Really, really great conversation. I hope we can do it again.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day, everyone.
Goodbye.